Hey, gang. Well, by Arizona standards, it is colder than a witch's tit outside. And so I've decided, plus, it's just, by the way, okay, don't laugh at me, those of you who are listening to me and watching in Montana or any place that actually has cold weather, Colorado, Maine, wherever you might be. It's 50 degrees for a high today. Right now it's about 47. And for me, that is just way too cold. I, if I wanted to live in Montana, I'd live in Montana. And I'm considering it actually. Well, anyway, it's another story for another day. So let's talk about addiction. The last time we spoke. So from oh, by the way, you can tell my behind me. My hobby is raising fish. I think that to have a healthy mind, everybody needs a hobby. It's just I don't know. I find it very clearing, And off to my side here where I look, there's another couple of fish tanks. Believe it or not, here in my home there are 18, 1-8. I'm out of my mind. I know, but what can I say? I've been raising fish since I was a little boy. Um, and those of you who do raise fish are welcome to drop me a line and we can talk. It's. I'm also a pilot. People who have aquariums, people who fly airplanes. I'm sure there are a lot of different hobbies that when you meet people when they do these things, you have instant friends, if you know what I mean. So anyway, so here we are in my fish area, and we're discussing addiction, which I'm not sure what one has to do with the other, but that's what I'm going to talk about today. And from now on, I'm going to do a recording every day the way I promised and not kept that promise because I keep waiting for every day to be nice, and lately it's been blowy and rainy and this and that, and then things happen and I get busy, and I also have to make a living. And how I make my living, by the way, is I do retail arbitrage: buy low, sell high, deal with the headaches in between. And so it takes, I get anyway. That was a lot of digression, and now I'm going to get down to the subject matter that I promised the last time we spoke, which was the nature of addiction. Okay, so I think everybody on both sides of the addiction discussion and the drug debate and the drug law debate all agree on one thing. So let's start with our point of agreement, which is drugs are bad. Now, let me even back that up. That's not really true. Drugs, when they are abused, are bad. Okay, drugs, when abused, are bad. But when they're not abused, and that statistically, I did some Googling and I did some DuckDuckGoing to see if I got different results from different search engines. I went on Bing. I did a lot of searching for what percentage of the population, is there any kind of general agreement, is addictive? And the answer is roughly, again, fact check me, is roughly about 10%. About one out of every 10 people are going to get addicted to something. In fact, just as a side note, I don't know if you ever caught the Netflix show about the family, I forget, Stackler or something like that, and I probably just ruined that. I don't know what their name was. I think it was Stackler or Sackler or something like that, who owned that Purdue Pharma, makers of OxyContin or whatever it was they were selling, and yada, yada, yada. Well, on this particular show, it was a dramatization, and they were showing this guy who owned a garage, and he was an upstanding guy and a family man and had a growing business, and then he hurt his back on the job, and one thing led to another, and he got addicted to OxyContin. I think that's what it was, or whatever they were selling at Purdue Pharma. Vicodin, that was it. I think that was it, Vicodin, and he got horribly addicted and ended up losing his family, his business, his life, and ended up on what we used to call Skid Row, but would just be today homeless. So that just has never actually happened. In every documented case of people that got into trouble with Vicodin, they had prior addictions before coming in. And I bring that out not to in any way make light or reduce or take the side of Purdue Pharma or anything like that. I'm just pointing out that addictive people get addicted, and non-addictive people do not get addicted, no matter what the drug is. I've tried everything short of injecting heroin in my life, and because I just don't like the idea of being injected. But I never felt like I was particular. Like I did cocaine back in the '80s, and I'll be honest with you, I don't get it. I mean, it did make me feel like God for 15 minutes, but then you'd have to do it again, and I just didn't. It didn't seem worth it for a deviated septum. It just didn't seem like something that I wanted to do. I tried LSD. I have used legal mushrooms, not very long recently, and Actually, I'm going to go camping with my son, and we'll probably do them again. And if mushrooms are a lot of fun if you have someone else to do them with, and you're innate. For me, I have to be out in nature, and it has to be quiet and secluded because I want to get the full effect. But I'm not doing it if we get rained out, or if or if the wind is howling or whatever happens. I don't feel any particular need to take a mushroom. I smoke marijuana regularly, and as do so many more seniors these days, because I would show you this shoulder has a scar about, I'd say 8 inches long, where I have my titanium shoulder, and this one's on its way. And marijuana is a great way to relieve, for me, muscle and joint pain, and have no hangover having done it. But I don't do it because I'm sad or I'm overly, or the point is, I'm not an addictive person. I don't drink alcohol. Do I not drink alcohol because I'm on the wagon? No, I was never off the wagon. I don't like the taste of alcohol. I never have. To me, beer tastes like what urine would taste like if you carbonated it. And on top of that, I hate carbonation. I drink everything that's flat. I drink iced tea and fruit juices and water. I don't. It's just so. Anyway, I don't want to go into my whole life. Why do you don't care what I am? The point is, like you probably, 9 out of 10 of you watching me right now, I am not addictive. Last quick personal anecdote before I move on to from what we all agree on, that drugs are bad only if misused. I mean, how many drugs? I'm going to be 67 years old in May, and I'm alive and well because of drugs. I've been a medicated hypertensive since I'm 25 years old. It runs in the family. It's natural. My blood pressure, I take it every single day. This morning was, I think it was 128 over 79 or something like that. And that's what it is pretty much every day. But it's under medicated control and has been for 40 years. And because of that, my risk of heart attack is no greater than a person who doesn't take any medication at all. And I take it every day. I don't consider it a sign of weakness, and thank God for it. Because of I have degenerative arthritis in my neck. I take a pill every day for the nerve pain. It's called duloxetine. It works absolutely great. My nerve pain is down 90%. Without that drug, I wouldn't be shaking my head. Let me just put it to you that way. The guy the first doctor who took an x-ray of my neck was my best friend. He's now retired. And he looked at my neck, and this is when I was probably 50 years old and first recognized I was having neck pain. He told me at that time I had the neck of an 85-year-old. So there you go. So the point is, and I'm sure you take your own prescriptions for your own reasons, and you get various degrees of effect. But the point is, how miserable would life be if we had no drugs to take? So we don't want to say drugs are bad. Drugs, when abused, are bad. And even so-called, even illegal drugs, not so-called, they're definitely illegal. LSD was made a Schedule I drug with no evidence that's never harmed anybody. Aside from the stories of people, trying to fly off the garage and all that kind of shit, and just digressing slightly, I accept that kind of thing. I don't believe it's ever happened, but if it actually has happened, it's not one of those, urban legend kind of things. This is probably natural selection. No one. I've done acid. I never thought for a moment that I wasn't. I didn't lose a sense of where I was. You know what I mean? Anyway. People who believe stories like that have never tried the drug that they're talking about. LSD shouldn't have been illegal to begin with, and now, of course, they're finding all kinds of therapeutic uses for hallucinogenics, for post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and all kinds of things. So they're getting remarkable results, which we could have had 30 years ago if we didn't have our heads so far up our asses. But having said that, even heroin / morphine / opiates there's nothing like them for pain relief. Now, I mean, I've never taken heroin, but I've had a shot of Dilaudid, and I'm going to tell you, it was the best I ever felt in my entire life. And I literally said to my wife at the time, I'll never ask for that. I'll never do that again. And she said, why? I said, because I liked it too much. I mean, I can understand why people really like Dilaudid, for those of you who don't know, is synthetic heroin. Heroin is a phenomenal painkiller, and it does make you feel elated. And that is the feeling these addicts pursue. So let us just agree now, and I'm going to move on to the next point, that it's not that drugs are bad, it's the abuse of drugs are bad. Any drug, when used properly, can have a positive benefit, and positive can mean just entertainment. There's absolutely nothing wrong with checking out. How many of you watching me right now have a couple of drinks every day, 1 or 2, or even 3, to, I don't know, take the buzz off at the end of the day. There's nothing wrong with admitting the stress of the day. When you'd like to check out for a few minutes, take a deep breath. You know, in the old days, I used to say, watch the news. That's the thing of the past. But maybe just close your eyes, listen to music, have a drink. I mean, I don't drink, but most of my friends do. And I think that's not addiction. That's using a drug the proper way, what it was meant to do. And it's a good use. Enjoying yourself and relieving stress is only a good thing. If it turns into unleashing a wild man, that's a different story altogether. That's the 10%. So let's move on to this next point that I think we can all agree on, but maybe you haven't considered. And that is when the government, when the National Institute of Health, the National, what is it, the NIH? Yeah, National Institute of Health, CDC, FDA, all the rest, they're all trying to do what's good for us. And they try to tell us what's good for us. And and a lot of it's misinformation. Just for a good example of sometimes the government is wrong is the food pyramid. I know that all of you thought I was going to go right to the COVID vaccine. They were wrong about a lot of that bullshit too, but I don't want to digress into COVID debate. Let's talk about something we can agree on without screaming, which is the food pyramid. The food pyramid, where you had so much fat and so much carb, and the base of it was carbohydrates, breads, grains, blah, blah, blah. It's inverted. You should be getting fats and protein. It reminds me of that Woody Allen movie Sleeper years ago, where he wakes up after being in a state of suspended animation for, I think it was 50 or 100 years, and he comes out and they hand him a steak and a cigarette and tell him, quick, eat this, smoke that, it's good for you, because you get the joke. Anyway, obscure. So when Woody Allen used to be truly funny. The point is that there's a lot of information put out supposedly for our own good. But what is our own good? Let's talk about that in a perspective of wisdom instead of just the popular narrative. What does good mean? Imagine for a moment, I'm assuming if you're watching this podcast, you're probably an aware, in touch, likely educated, whether it's formally or self-educated, well-read, exposed kind of person, and you're interested in these sort of things. Well, that's great. But what if you were born into a family where your mother and father were both addicts? And maybe you were beaten, and maybe you lived in an urban area where things were just terrible. Maybe you were a victim of incest. Maybe you were, which is all too common, my friends, much more common. One day we're going to talk about incest because I am a victim of incest, and you'd be shocked how pervasive it is in our culture. I'm one of the lucky ones. Okay, the damage it did to me is something I can deal with, but for many, many people who suffer incest curl into a proverbial, not a metaphorical fetal position. They go through their life, but they're just ruined. So there's the point I'm making is there's all kinds of damage that all of us endure, and there comes a point where the natural biological wiring of that person just can't overcome it. It would be nice to believe that we could reconcile everybody's life and come out to a happy ending every time there was a serious problem. But the problem is, I don't mean to be redundant, is that not every problem is resolvable. Not every situation is resolvable. Not every wound can be healed. Not every sickness can be cured. It's for millions and millions and millions of people. Life is something to be endured, and their goal is not longevity. Okay, it's to get through, to wake up in the morning into a life of, again, relative. It's all perceptual. You might look at their life and say, and so would I. There's possibility you could do this, but I know it's hard to put yourself there. But when I was in prison, I was surrounded by people like this. These people have no ability in any way, not emotional, not intellectual, not by family support, not cultural, not religious, nothing. Their lives are built on foundations of air. There's just nothing there. In fact, not even air, it's a vacuum. They have no real hope. They know that their life is going to be a repetition of where they already are, ultimately ending up dead. And if it gets them through the day, okay, are drugs bad for that kind of person? In other words, if a person is completely non-functional, God forbid a victim of incest, and usually one thing goes with another. incest and then beatings and then screaming and then drug addiction and alcoholism, these things all, it's never just a simple background. And, a father and a mother who are a nightmare, or a father who isn't present, or a mother who is wildly promiscuous. There's a million ways to fuck up a child because your children, and I speak as a father, thank God, a successful father of four, in the sense that all four of my children are happy, independent, educated, self-supporting adults. Thank God. Not without their, I downloaded a lot of my shit into them too. I am not the god of fatherhood, but I'm definitely above average for sure. And I'm telling you that absent that, it's very tough to make life, to be positive. I mean, the kids I met in prison, to me, they're kids. They might be 40 years old, but I still call them a kid. There is no hope, and they're not going to be fixed. Now, the question is, do you want them breaking into your home or not? Okay, so if we accept that there is a certain hardcore part of the population that's going to get it, let me back that up. About 10% of the population is going to suffer from addiction, and there's a percentage of the addicted that are going to become dysfunctional. Now, that's the third point we can come to. There are a lot of people who are functional addicts, okay, particularly functional alcoholics, because alcohol by far is the most widespread used drug. So you and I guarantee know, and you may even be one yourself, and that is, I'm not disparaging. I think there are worse things in life than to be a functional alcoholic. Again, people carry emotional baggage, but at different levels. There are people, I had a friend, okay, I'm going to call him Stan. That's not his name, but I'm just going to use it because it's the name of a character in South Park. It's the first thing that popped in my head. So Stan was and is a self-made man. Never graduated from high school. Worked like a dog. Went to work in a small shop. I'm not going to use any actual details because people who are living where I lived and who know me and might see this later will now guess who I'm talking about. So I am going to deliberately obfuscate some of the details, but keep the general track of this story correct. So Stan didn't graduate from high school, went to work in a business and learned that business extremely well to the point where ultimately he took it over and became the proprietor of the business after years of working there in an apprenticeship / learning on the ground. From that, he took what was a small business and made it into a big business. Last time I looked, I think he had 1,500 employees. Now, that's not big by General Motors standards, but by the communities where most of us live, people who have 1,500 employees are wealthy, very wealthy. And so was he. And he was a very good friend of mine and a great guy. And in fact, he was a guy that let me take away the mitigator. I did and do admire him. He had a very successful marriage. He had beautiful children, including a child that had serious lifelong handicaps. But he and his wife really were magnificent in how they raised their children. This is a guy who I viewed as nothing less than heroic, and I view as nothing less than heroic. Now, one day, when I was developing real estate in Mexico, and I've shared with you that I was a pilot, I had an airplane, and not a jet, but a single-engine propeller plane, but it was turbocharged and had built-in oxygen. It was a very, very nice, capable, all-weather airplane. It was called a Commander 114 TC, for those of you who are pilots. I think it was a 1999 model. And a beautiful airplane. I'm sure it's out there still flying. Planes fly for decades. So he got in the plane, wanted to go down and look at the project in Mexico and go down to the town. The town that we were developing in was called Puerto Peñasco, or in English, actually that means Rocky Port, but here in Arizona, everyone calls it Rocky Point. It's Arizona's beach. It's about a equidistant 3-hour drive from either Phoenix or Tucson equally. So it's quick to get to, and it's a gorgeous, sandy, soft, gorgeous, beautiful beach on the Sea of Cortez, in a wonderful town with wonderful people, and it's a great place. And I used to have a home there, and now my ex-wife has a home there. This is way back before the shit hit the fan. We divorced at the end of the last century, and anyway, I love the town. So this was obviously in the last century. So we fly down to Rocky Point, or it was early this one. I don't remember exactly. We fly down to Rocky Point, and he gets in the plane, and he has one of those little Coleman cooler things, the 6-pack cooler. And he has a 6-pack of beer. And I don't really think much of it, although it is early in the morning. He's not the first guy I've ever seen have a beer or two during the day. And, I actually wasn't prepared to have him bring it along, since it's not hard to find beer in Mexico. Mexico Mexico has drive-through beer stands. God bless them. I mean, it's a very different perception, just saying. And I'm not making, no one should drive. I don't drive under the influence of anything, and neither should anybody else. Let's not go off on any wild tangent. Okay, so, make a long story short, he drank all 6 beers. The flight from Tucson, where we were, to Puerto Penasco by air was about 40 minutes in my airplane, because you go as the crow flies. You don't have to, you're going a lot faster than a car. Roughly in miles per hour, I'm going about 200 miles an hour in a straight line, as opposed to, So, and I didn't, obviously don't have to clear the border. And yes, you have to clear customs when you get into Mexico, but the comandante at the airport there was a good friend of mine, and I used to basically walk through and yada, yada, yada. So I was kind of shocked. 6 beers in 40 minutes is a lot of beer. And he shot him down, like, without swallowing. And then as soon as we got there, he wanted me to drive by the nearest liquor store, which there's tons of them, convenience stores, that kind of thing, so we could grab another cold 6-pack, throw it in there. And while we were there, we were in Rocky Point we stayed through lunch and came back in the middle to late afternoon. I remember maybe 3 or 4 o'clock. And in that span, I saw him drink a minimum of 16 beers. I shit you not. And he only peed twice. I don't really understand how he held it all, but there you go. And of course, I was taken back by it, and I said to him, "Stan, Jesus Christ, you're drinking." I mean, that's how I talk to my friends. We're straight with each other. And Stan says to me, "You've never seen me when I wasn't drunk, and you wouldn't like me if you did." Now, that was the whole punchline of the whole reason I told you this story. Stan understood himself in his terms. Who am I? Just in every possible way, Stan led a life that was exemplary to the outside anyway, but clearly carrying enormous amounts of personal demons, and how he dealt with it was to suppress it with alcohol. And who am I? Who are you? Who are any of us to pass judgment? And he was a fully functional alcoholic. His wife, I think I'll call her Mary, fully understood that he was an alcoholic. It was an accepted thing in the family. It led to no abuse. Not everybody is like a movie on TV. Not every alcoholic turns into a wife beater, okay? And not every drunk wife ends up under an overpass or, having sex with strangers. There are many, 9 out of 10 alcoholics are fully functional. They go to work, they come home, and, they're not surgeons. I realize that a tiny little bunch might be a surgeon or a professional pilot. Like, for example, the rule in flying is 12 hours, no intoxicants or anything of any kind. My rule was always 24. If I was going to fly the next day, as I told you, I smoked marijuana from time to time, but not within 24 hours of flying an airplane. And I realize it wears off long before that, but I'm taking myself and other people's lives in my hands. And so most people take it seriously. But for those that don't, there's such a tiny percentage, you can't go through your life. You can't let the tail wag the dog. The enemy of good is perfect. So we agree, okay, that drugs abused can be bad, that longevity is not the goal for everybody, and there are functional alcoholics. Now, if we can, or functional addicts, if we can agree on those 3 things, why the fuck are drugs illegal? Why are we making something that somebody wants, and the vast majority of people can use, and use either for purpose or pleasure effectively and safely? Why have we spent $1 trillion in a drug war that I can tell you, okay, is lost, has been lost, will be lost, will always be lost? And we're not dealing with addiction. What is addiction? Addiction is the self-medication of self-loathing, or better put, the unprescribed medication of self-loathing. Okay? At some level, someone is horribly damaged in some way. They may or may not discuss it. It's completely, from where I sit, there but for the grace of God goes I. So I do not pass judgments on other people and why they end up where they do. I just try to understand and empathize with why they are. And I was in prison with hundreds of young men obviously I was in a men's prison, but this would apply just the same to women, who in another circumstance might have been engineers, doctors, and lawyers. They certainly had the intellect, but life had dealt them, the luck of genetics had dealt them a horrible card. Horrible parents, horrible neighborhood, horrible relatives, horrible situation. They were permanently destroyed. If they want to get through their day to use drugs, what do you say we make it cheap and easy for them and provide treatment for free for those that want it? Okay? Cheap and easy just means legalize it. Let them sell heroin at Walgreens. You know, the same way that you can buy cigarettes. Show an ID, be over the age of 18. Of course, reasonable restriction and regulation. No one is saying open the street corners to street pushers. By the way, that is also one of those made-up movies things. Drugs are sold to by drug addicts to each other because that's how they make money without losing their welfare benefits, which is another discussion for another day. Welfare is a whole separate issue, but insofar, which is part of the 1964 plan, by the way. But let's stick with addiction. Would it not be much more intelligent to treat addicts with empathy as opposed to criminalizing them, locking them up, costing between enforcement and in prison? We're talking over $1 trillion since we started this thing in 1971, and there's more addicts, not less. If they could go down to Walgreens, heroin, I know because I knew a lot of guys in that business when I was in prison, heroin for 5% of its street prices still earns about 100% profit on everything sold because heroin is cheap to make. It's only expensive to an addict because of the cost of avoiding interdiction. So if drugs were legal, you could buy heroin literally as cheaply as you can buy generic aspirin. It is not a patentable formula. It's been around too long. It would be made by a whole bunch of generic producers, distributed through a normal drugstore network. If you're 18 or over and can prove it with a legitimate ID, or make it 21. Listen, whatever the community, I'm big into federalism. I think you leave it to the local states and communities to decide what the age is. But whatever the age is of consent, let them have it. That way they can support their habits by those that can, working in jobs like in a fast food, custodian work. One thing we're always going to need is custodians, ditch diggers, people to work at the car wash, things like that. And those are good jobs for people in a certain situation, and they could support their habit, which is all they're trying to do. Understand, this is it. This is their goal in life. Support their habit without breaking into your house or your car or mugging you to do it. And then they wouldn't have to kill each other over drug deals because there would be no drug deals because Walgreens would be distributing the drugs, not the local gangs. So now the gangs are out of the drug business, and so are the cartels. What we're doing now is we're protecting the cartels because by making the cost of interdiction so high, small competitors can't compete in the free drug market against the large cartels. So they are the last people on earth who want drugs legalized because that would open up their markets. It would be like letting cheaper producers into the military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin and Northrop and Raytheon and the rest, baby, they make sure the government shuts out competition. That's a protected market. That's the way the cartels operate now. Okay, it is so expensive to import drugs into the United States that it's left to the cartels. And in the United States, the one cheap drug that you can produce is meth, and that's controlled by the bikers, basically. Every biker I knew was in the meth business. Well, I say let's put those assholes out of business. I mean, come on now. Let Walgreens distribute it. Let CVS distribute it. And they distribute every other kind of drug. They're distributing OxyContin to people who don't abuse it. Lost in that story was, now, I'll tell you the truth. After I had my shoulder done, they gave me Vicodin or OxyContin or whatever the hell it is. And I took 2 doses of it, and it made me so nauseous and constipated this is when I got home, and they gave me a little jar of it, that I flushed them. I didn't want them around the apartment, and I threw them away because, frankly, they make me nauseous, and constipation is, just speaking for myself, a miserable thing. So I just used Tylenol and gutted it out. But for a lot of people, they get tremendous relief. Anyway, I think I've covered enough of this for today. Let's see, I've gone on for a half an hour, what should have been a 10-minute discussion. So I'll leave it at that. Tomorrow will be a new discussion. Have a beautiful day. Don't laugh at me because I think 50 degrees is cold. And God bless everyone. Oh, and don't forget, 1964plan.org. Take care.